Wealth is brought to you by the Department of Neighborhoods Generational Wealth Initiative, the Washington Housing Finance Commission, and Rainier Avenue Radio World.
You know you can't get enough of Rainier Avenue Radio World.
All right, this is Rainier Avenue Radio, coming to you live from Seattle's Columbia City Theater. I'm Sam Harris, housing economist and co-founder of SeeKing Change, an organization examining the homeless situation in the greater Seattle and King County region. Each week, we'll explore an issue at the heart of the problem to find the root causes of homelessness. At the end of this 12 weeks, we'll present a unified solution. Week 1, we explored the nature of sweeps with COC co-chair Ruby Romero. I left that conversation feeling that the semblance of control that we feel by removing people without providing housing is more than offset by the damage it creates to the people displaced. And in week 2, Joe Malloy focused on changing stigmas about autism, neurodivergence, and disability in the homeless community. It would appear that the trauma of losing your housing can exacerbate or trigger mental, physical, and emotional issues that can make stabilization even more challenging. Week 3, we explored the trauma of housing instability and how we can support stabilization for people who have experienced this trauma and reinvigorate hope. Week 4, Mike Mathias explored housing first concepts, and he's back with us today to dive a little deeper into what is actually happening out there. Mike Mathias, Executive Director of Anything Helps and Housing First Expert, thank you for being here again. Let's start with your take on sweeps. We talked earlier about revolving door problem. Perhaps you can explain what happens to a person who joins an encampment and is threatened to be swept.
Yeah, I can do that. So thanks for having me. I think one of the challenges with following encampment sweeps for so long is that you start seeing that broken record, that revolving door. And what people don't understand is that the only thing that are, people are lucky to get offers of, shelter beds or things like that in this city. There's a common misconception that people are choosing to be outside over some other unknown option, and that's just not the case. There's no place for them to go. And so when there is, it's usually a less than ideal option. Encampments actually provide people with a sense of safety and familiarity because of the locale that they're in, the people that they're close to. They can leave all of their possessions behind and go get things done because they know the people around them. You can't get that in a shelter. You can't get that with a population that you don't know. And so, when people are offered shelter, only 1 in 10 times will someone take it. That's often seen as a, now they're choosing to be outside. But, when you really think about it, those benefits just make that option a general net loss in overall welfare for them.
Well, okay. What is wrong with the housing that they're being offered? Is it housing?
No. So,
okay.
Yeah, it's my bugaboo. So, so shelter and housing are two very separate things, okay. Right? Housing is what people see as the finish line in our system, and it's not. It's the starting line. So anything less is we're not even getting started, and that's the problem with our system is we haven't even gotten started on this issue. Shelters are temporary, accommodations that were originally designed to be emergency based. So that's why we still use them for disaster services and emergency, migration and things like that.
So would you say housing loss is considered an emergency?
Yeah, we're in a state, this is our 8th year in a state of emergency on homelessness. I mean, okay. I don't know why we're still managing the problem, but we're definitely not addressing it. We haven't even gotten close. So,
right.
And it's mainly because of the investment in ineffective interventions like homeless sweeps, emergency shelters, these temporary things that we want these quick fixes to just get people out of our way so we don't have to deal with the problem. But in all reality, like, the money that we spend to do that is eliminating our ability to invest in the longer term solutions. And so we just see people cycle in and out of shelters and the streets. And that is the revolving door.
Okay, so let's just say I'm in a tent in an encampment and a sweep is about to occur. What are the requirements for that sweep? You know, do they have to give me notice? Is there a place for me to go?
It just depends on a couple factors. So the city of Seattle is very generous on, you know, their own side of things when it comes to whether or not somebody is considered an obstruction, which means they're you know, basically making things not disability accommodable. And if that's the case, they don't need notice, they don't need offers of shelter, they don't need anything. And we see that more often than not when you see people being removed from you know, public places. However, when they can't do that, they can just have one shelter bed available in the entire county. And that's all they need to sweep 30 plus people out of their, you know, encampment. Because if nobody's going to accept it, then the offer was made and that's all they need to do.
So if it's inadequate for any of them.
Yeah.
So if you have 30 people, they have one bed and none of them accept it, that seems to me like that's an inadequate bed.
Yeah, you would think so. Yeah.
Right.
But the bed being inadequate is not the problem. The offer is what the law requires them to make. So essentially they need to have another place to go before you're legally allowed to sweep them out of where they are. And if they don't, then that's considered cruel and unusual punishment. That's what the Supreme Court hearing is all about, trying to dispel that. But you know, as it stands now, if they have somewhere else to go, then the city has every right to remove them from where they are.
And it's anywhere in the county.
Anywhere in the
giant.
county.
So if I'm in Bitter Lake and there's a shelter, a congregate shelter open in Renton.
Yeah.
And I don't know anyone in Renton.
Yeah.
And I don't know where anything is in
Yep.
Renton.
Those aren't things
And
that
how do I get there?
None of those things are things that the city has to consider, nor do they.
So when they say, I mean, this is one of the things I hear a lot is, well, they don't even want. That's what they prefer. You know,
Yeah.
it's what they prefer. They want to be out in the park doing drugs, living the free life. I just heard that last week, and I thought to myself, that doesn't seem like consistent with what I've seen.
Well, there's two types of person that I work with. And the first one, that's absolutely not the case. The second one, they believe that they are choosing that because they have to believe that they're choosing that. Because if they're not, then, and there's no end in sight, then they kind of go into despair. And that's why you see a lot of psychosis and out-of-body experiences on the street, because people have no control over that situation. And that can drive somebody to madness. Losing your stuff, everything you own. Consider having that happen time and time and time again. That's why hoarding happens and all of these other challenges, because, you know, this is an inescapable situation for a large number of people. And if they're not choosing that in some way, if they don't have any sense of possession over that lifestyle choice, quote unquote, then some people just can't make it. And then I guess there's a third person out there that just sees the way they're treated by the general population, and what accepting offers of shelter would mean is that they're integrating into society where people treat people like that. And so, like, you know, some people just don't want to, you know, be a part of that population. Because they're like,
you've been through that process of being, I mean, essentially when you lose your housing, you've lost to capitalism. And I think of it like Monopoly sometimes, where you lose the game, you have to start the game over.
Yep.
And if the other guys are still playing, well, then, you know, you have to find other people to play the game with. So how when a person loses their housing, how do they go and find other people to play the game with, right? How do they find options?
Well, they don't. What they do is they play a new game, and that new game is finding people in similar situations and trauma bonding and creating, an entire culture where they all feel accepted. And that's one of the biggest challenges that we have today, is that we've allowed this problem to go on for so long that, and we're creatures of, we're social animals. So when you have people that have been isolated from society, and they've been like that for 4 generations now, you have a culture that has permeated from that. And that culture is maladaptive, and it doesn't intersect well with our current society, and there's a reason for that. Yeah, we have a lot of challenges ahead of us.
Yeah. Okay, so let's just assume that I lose my housing, and now I have a game of survival.
Okay.
Right. Okay. So I may have a few bucks left. I can get food. I get a resource provider to help me get a tent. I pitch a tent in a place that's tucked away. So you're not going to get swept right away. You kind of have to hide, it feels like. How do I get back on my feet? And let's just assume I could even get a shelter. What is that process? How do I get a shelter? Do I have to find you, another caseworker, or is there a place to go?
So I think it's something like more than 3/4 of the shelter beds in King County are reserved by the city and county for the laws requiring those offers to be made during sweeps. So you really, like, as a provider, I know.
Wait, you have to get swept in order to get the offer?
Yeah, you can't proactively go to a shelter and be like, hey, I need a shelter bed. It doesn't work that way. You have to be in a camp.
Are we encouraging people to be in encampments so they can get swept and get housing?
I mean, that's just the way the system works, because the system is so narrow scoped that, it's, focusing and, to answer your question with answering a question, the same problem exists for these two issues. So the city is very narrow-minded because they're dealing with an urgent problem. And so they narrow their scope of vision and they focus on this quick fix. And they don't think about the fact that they're, essentially incentivizing people to sleep in parks. The same thing can be said about escaping homelessness. When you're homeless, you are in survival mode. Everything is urgent and dire and timely, and your needs renew every day. So you can meet your needs one day, those needs are going to come right back the next day. And because of that, you narrow your scope. This is called the scarcity mindset. It affects your IQ the same as being intoxicated would, 14 IQ point reduction. And when you have that type of impairment, you just can't consider long-term options. Your frontal cortex, it's not playing the game. So you don't see your choices the same way when you're in scarcity. So,
right. And of course, there's I always like to come back to the University of Washington's study that, living without housing reduces life expectancy by 30 years.
Yep.
And kind of dig in and see why. And, that first day of housing loss, you really do have to begin to adapt.
Yeah, it immediately is just a traumatizing experience right away.
Yeah, you have to just turn your back from the game and say, okay, it's adaptation time. I gotta hunker down.
Yeah,
right.
It's a really terrifying moment. I've been there, and so when you turn in your keys to your apartment or you get evicted or what have you, and the moment that you realize that you don't know where you're going to go to sleep for the first time in your life is just a very frightening feeling. Yeah.
Well, okay. So let's just say someone like you comes along, sees this person and says, hey, let's get you out of here. And you find one of these temporary shelters and they go in. How long can they stay?
It depends on the shelter because they're all funded differently. So some shelters are funded to keep people, keep their beds occupied. That's a more traditional funding methodology, but there are plenty of Seattle shelters that are funded that way. Some of them are funded by outcomes, which means that they're incentivized to move people into housing from the shelter. And that's
There we go.
that's definitely a good way to do it, right? And then there's another type that is paid up front for a year's worth of occupancy every time that a bed is filled. And that's a more private funding route. And there are certain organizations out here, I won't name names, but that really take advantage of that and will, rapid fire that revolving door. Like it becomes almost like a no door on the hinges at all on the back door, where they're disengaging clients and exiting them back to the streets quickly because their funders haven't caught wise.
So they get into the shelter and they put them back out on the streets?
Yeah, a lot. So like, depending on your funding, you're getting paid for, a year in that private funder situation, right?
Yeah.
So you don't have any incentive to move somebody into housing unless you own the housing yourself, right? Then you can put those outcomes on your stat bar, but usually you have a mix of funding and you have certain metrics to meet as a shelter for different programs, different funding sources. So you're just kind of looking at like, okay, what do I do with this person? And if it benefits you, and if the time works out where there's, a need to hit a deadline or, some back office, BS, we see very often people just randomly be exited for fabricated reasons. This is the most voiceless population there is. The people are under the impression that nobody's going to know. That's why there are, such enormous rates of violence in this population, because they don't really have justice provided to them. There's no protection for them from these types of events.
Right. What kind of protections are available
for people experiencing homelessness?
Yeah. Is it just caseworkers that
encampments?
Right.
That's the only thing that they have is to shelter in place and figure out who they can trust. And over time you learn that, and you just hunker up. And like, if you're not going to be able to go with them, you're not going.
Right. Yeah. One of the problems I keep hearing from from people in encampments, the reason they joined in the first place was because when you're sitting in a tent alone, it always reminds me of that Far Side where there's a polar bear taking a bite out of an igloo.
Oh, okay.
And he's like, oh, I love these things. Crunchy on the outside, chewy in the middle.
Oh my God.
Because when you're in a tent, every little stick that cracks near you is a moment of panic.
Yep.
And how do you sleep? Right. And so the sleep issue is another thing that exacerbates all of these other issues. And we think about how hard it is to sleep, all the pills there are for sleeping. That's in a bed behind a locked door, right? This takes it to another level. And the one thing you get with an encampment is that security, is that the guys next to you.
Yep.
Those people, this whole group, and they're kind of looking out for each other.
Yeah.
Which almost as if we're a tribal being, right?
Well, that's exactly what this is if you look at our evolutionary history, like we've just, we've put these, this vulnerable population in a position where they've, been forced to tribalize.
Yeah.
And when I go into an encampment and I'm trying to work with people, I have to go in as a negotiator. And I have to go in and go, what is it going to take for you to re-enter society and feel like that's worth it to you? And it's a negotiation. You have to really get to know someone and really get to have a better idea of what supports they have. And, they're not just going to freely give you that information. It's not something that they want to give up. And there's also the habitual part of it. When you've been out there for so long, chaos becomes your comfort zone, and it's very difficult to get out of that.
Yeah, to me, that defines chronic homelessness.
No,
is when you're in that point where you don't have hope of rehousing.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so let's just say I get into a shelter. What are the supports available to me? How do I find them to get permanent supportive housing?
So no idea.
You keep
There's just
laughing.
no way. There's no way of knowing. No, I'm serious.
Yeah.
Like, there's no definitive pathways. There's no structure to our system. We like to think that there is, but it's a black box that even the people in the black box don't know what's going on. Just yesterday, I got an email from another provider at another organization, and he just goes, "Hey, I've got housing for one of your clients," and I'm like, "Oh my God, great!" But I didn't put any effort into that. It
Right.
wasn't anything that I did. I don't know what he did either. I don't know if he even knows what he did. So, it's
Can't
just
do it.
things
He's
just
like,
kind of
"Ooh."
happen. And, we have our program has an upcoming lottery for some vouchers for clients. And I didn't know that was going to happen until, they sent me an Excel spreadsheet with a bunch of our clients on it prioritized. And I was like, great. But there's no way to, all you can do is prepare for signing a lease with clients, keep them alive, and continue to, stay in touch with all of the other providers. So when something goes on, you're aware of it. It's a terrible system. Like, for the amount of money that we put into it, I understand why the public thinks homelessness is a choice, because you put millions and millions of dollars every year, almost $1 billion a year, into homelessness. You expect people to have choices, right?
Right.
No, I'd say 60 to 70% of that is administrative cost. So people are just getting paid.
Okay, so you have one shelter. I go in there. I sleep that night. The next day, there's somebody there that I can talk to about rehousing.
Sometimes. Yeah, sometimes.
Okay. And how do they access housing? Can I look at what's available out there? How do you get housing vouchers?
So there is a 10-year waiting list for King County vouchers right now. And to get on that waiting list, you have to win a lottery that they run every 3 years. So that's not an option. And then you've got the Seattle Housing Authority, which was doing the same thing, but then recently decided, we're just going to do a random lottery. So come here, re-sign up. We're dropping the wait list, and anybody can get randomly chosen. So they do a lottery for their available vouchers, but even then, vouchers aren't always available. It takes a year or two for some to jiggle loose, and when that's the case, they'll do a random poll. But now there's Section 8 is a incredibly helpful program for the people who get it. But
what does that do exactly? Because I've only seen that from the landlord side, and I've never had a landlord that had a building that could actually do it.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the biggest problems that we have in the city is that we see the solution to homelessness as basically reinstitutionalizing, right? So permanent supportive housing is a service model. It's not a building with services in it. You're describing an asylum. You're describing an inpatient hospital when you talk about that. Yeah, you can build it in the community, but you're concentrating poverty. That doesn't make any sense. Section 8 vouchers, what they do is they provide you social mobility and choice as somebody that's homeless. So it's attached to you as a person. It's not attached to a place.
There we go.
Right. So when you're providing people the affordability attribute that we usually subscribe to buildings and housing, and you're actually applying it to them, then more things are affordable in more places. And so you can get reconnected with your family. You don't have to be, housed by a bunch of people that are doing drugs if you're trying to get, clean. You don't, you're not in a high crime area. You may be able to find better employment. You don't have to take your kids to a segregated school system. These are all, symptoms of how we address the issue now. And so many people just abandon their permanent housing because they're like, I don't want to be here anymore. And they'll go back to the streets, and then they'll end up at the same, shelter that is funding that housing. So they don't care because they're making money either way.
Right.
So it's just like, what are we doing, guys?
Yeah. Well, I've heard you talk a lot about the scattered housing,
Scattered site, yeah.
scattered site housing, where you integrate people into a building, and people adapt to what they're surrounded by.
Yeah.
Like
I was saying before, like, you have a culture of homelessness now, and just because you move it inside doesn't mean that it goes away. So, those maladaptive social norms that are created when you're surrounding yourself with people that have fundamental issues with behavior is that becomes normative. Like, that becomes the normal behavior that you feel is acceptable. And so when you place people in the community and scatter them throughout, which I would never do the way we do now, which is like not providing them any services that are coming to their door. But if you provide them at least that community integration, what you see is people with healthy social norms that cause pressure to be placed on people's otherwise maladaptive behaviors. It no longer is a normal thing.
Right, you're shaped by your surroundings.
Yes,
always. Right. That's perfect.
So you want to wrap around them, but not just as a service model, but as a community.
Well, so this is fascinating because it goes back to the affordability issue.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do give someone a voucher like Section 8, or I think those probably work differently, but if you give people the freedom to say, okay, I need a simple place to live, and they can just go to, online and look at available apartments, then suddenly it changes the dynamic where you can get into, especially if you have a caseworker you're working with, that to me seems like one of the biggest challenges is having somebody you can trust. Like you were saying before, that trust is priceless.
Yeah.
Right.
It's the catalyst for everything. Like
right.
you can't help people escape where they're at now without that.
Okay. So this is a great place to kind of take a little tangent onto what you did several years ago in Bitter Lake. One of the reasons that Anything Helps came to my notice was this Bitter Lake encampment that you took over, and I would say it was a resounding success, right? You resolved that encampment.
Yep.
Which is as far as I know, that's the only time you've had a full resolution. People actually get not shelter. You got them housing.
Yep.
That to me is profound. How did you do it, and can we do it now?
Man, well, I would never recommend that we do it the way we did it because it was, 5 volunteers in the middle of a homeless encampment with, over 100 people in it during the pandemic, in the middle of the camp for 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, getting to know people, getting to know their needs, getting to know who they were, connecting them to whatever they felt like they needed at the time. One of the things that we really wanted to do with that opportunity was to create an alternative, because right now it's just like, you have all these advocates going like, don't sweep the camp. And it's like, that's not reasonable. Like, they're living in deplorable conditions. Like, they need housing. But then you've got people that are like, throw them in jail. And I'm like, well, that's not the answer. Right? So you've got sweep or no sweep. And that's all we hear. And I was like, I was sick of that. And so I'm like, let's try something different. And so we acknowledged the fact that, we acknowledged a couple facts. The first fact that we acknowledged by doing what we did was that people experiencing homelessness don't want to go to shelter. They want housing. 98% of the people that we work with, and this was a 2021 survey that we actually measured, would accept permanent housing if it was offered to them. But the only thing they ever get offered is shelter. So we thought, okay, why don't we just bring the shelter to the streets, right? What if we just brought the services that would otherwise be in a shelter and the accommodations like Wi-Fi, like a charging station, like a computer with a fax machine and a scanner and everything that you would possibly need to, get people ready for housing.
Did you provide food as well?
Yeah, food, warm meals, shower. We had a mobile shower system. We brought everything to the site, and we're like, you are sheltering in place. You feel safe and comfortable here. I'm not going to change that, but I am going to give you what you say that you will accept, which is housing. So we focused on getting them completely ready for that, getting all their documentation together, their IDs. We replaced everybody's IDs, everybody on food stamps, everybody on Medicaid, everybody on, whatever entitlements they were afforded. And then we started, sharing that information with the community. And we treated the entire community kind of like our client. So not just the camp, but the surrounding people. And
From like businesses.
yeah, businesses,
the
neighbors,
houses
the
nearby.
school. Yeah, it was on school property.
Right.
And we were just radically honest with everybody that we were working with. And we're like, what can we do to help? And that's why we named it Anything Else, because, tell me what you need.
Oh, yeah. Well, that is perfect. Well, thank you. It looks like we're out of time. So that is it for Seeking Change this week. I'm Sam Harris. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned for Seattle Here and Now.